Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Henry Rogers. I'm the Executive Director here at the Harbor Association of Industry and Commerce, and I definitely want to thank everyone for joining us here today on today's very critical discussion on environmental issues at our shared ports of LA and Long Beach. Before starting, I definitely want to thank some of our presenting sponsors today, both the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach. Have been very helpful in getting many of our virtual programs set up, so we want to thank them. Our event sponsors for the day are BYD, SoCal Gas, and P2S. And then our silver sponsor this morning is Mitsubishi Cement, who has always been very helpful and generous to us. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce today's panel. As our moderator, we have Mr. Greg Alexander. Greg is a senior project manager at P2S. He brings nearly 20 years of analytical and regulatory experience in the public and private sectors. Greg has focused much of his career on the ports and goods movement sector over this time. He has helped clients successfully navigate the regulatory and technical obstacles necessary to reduce air emissions, operating costs, and eliminating inefficiencies. Over these years, Greg has been deeply involved in emission reduction and electrification strategies for ocean-going vessels, cargo handling equipment, and on-road trucks. Greg is a board member of the Harbor Association of Industry and Commerce and is an active participant in the American Association of Port Authorities. A registered civil engineer, he holds his bachelor's from Harvey Mudd College and his master's from the University of Southern California in environmental engineering. Then we have Mr. Chris Cannon. Chris Cannon is the Director of Environmental Management for the Port of Los Angeles, a position he has held since October of 2010. In 2015, he was named Chief Sustainability Officer for the port. In his role, Chris is responsible for balancing commerce and growth with ecological sustainability and social responsibility at the nation's busiest container port, excuse me. The Environmental Management Division provides full environmental services related to water, soils, and sediments, air and biological resources, and is responsible for the preparation of environmental impact assessments mandated by the state and federal laws. Special studies involving dredging, noise abatement, water quality and air quality, site restoration, remediation, and contamination characterization, along with wildlife management and establishment of policies regarding environmental quality issues. Mr. Cannon has worked at the Port of Los Angeles as a consultant starting in 2004, where he worked for the Port's Environmental Management Division's Air Quality and CEQA groups, supporting the development of key air projects such as our Clean Air Action Plan, as well as the Harbor Department's effort to complete critical environmental impact reports for port-related projects. In 2008, he helped to develop and served as the project manager for the port's highly successful Clean Trucks program. Mr. Cannon comes with over 28 years of experience in the environmental service industry, working on a range of projects while employed by Environ International Corporation and TRC Environmental Solutions. Mr. Cannon also spent 2 years as a legislative assistant for environmental policy on the Washington, D.C. staff of Representative Martin Sabo of Minnesota. Chris received his bachelor's degree in government from Dartmouth College and a law degree from the University of California, Berkeley, Bolt School of Law. He currently lives in Los Angeles. Now, his counterpart at the Port of Long Beach is Mr. Matthew Arms. Matt Arms is Director of Environmental Planning for the Port of Long Beach. Environmental Planning is the division most directly responsible for the port's signature environmental programs, the Green Port Policy, and the San Pedro Bay Port's Clean Air Action Plan, CAP. Under the 2005 Green Port Policy, a landmark industry initiative, the division coordinates programs to improve air, water, and soil quality, preserve wildlife habitat, and integrate sustainability into port practices. Due to the effectiveness of these programs, total diesel emissions at the port have drastically dropped by 87% since 2005. The native wildlife is making a comeback. Mr. Arms earned his bachelor's in science in environmental science from Washington State University. He worked at a Seattle environmental consulting firm before beginning his career at the port. Gentlemen, thank you for your time, and Greg, I'll hand it on over to you.
Well, thank you, Henry, and for the kind introductions, and thank you, Matt and Chris, for the time this morning. I know we've got a lot of great topics that people are excited to hear about. So let me jump straight into some questions. And Matt, I will kick it off to you first. Talking about air quality and emission reductions, what are the most significant challenges that the port faces to hit your aggressive 2030 targets for zero emission from cargo handling equipment and 2035 from trucks? You know, those are big goals. What keeps you up at night?
That goal. No, I think that you know, one thing that we at both ports have demonstrated that we are as leaders in advancing technology. But you know, there's two challenges to the zero emissions goals. I'm interested in hearing Chris's. Well, there's many challenges, but Chris's opinion as well. But the first is the technology, right? We need to get the technology over the hump from demonstrations, prototypes, as good as they may be doing, into commercialization, right? We need the equipment going down the OEM's assembly line and having it something that can be purchased and produced and warranted. And so that's one goal, and then or challenge. And then the other challenge, as big, is funding. It's an extremely expensive transition, and we need to be able to establish the funding mechanisms in order to purchase both the equipment as well as install the required infrastructure. So I'd say that those two things are the big challenges as I see it.
Chris, what do you think?
I agree with Matt. I mean, the biggest challenge is technology. We really are going through a much more transformative phase with the emissions and controls and programs to reduce emissions at both ports. And so we're gonna have to rely on technologies that are still emerging, particularly in the zero emissions area. A lot of testing, a lot of demonstration, a lot of development of technology, really helping to serve as you know, a test bed for technology. A lot of our technical people tell us that you know, the ports of LA and Long Beach are, you know, one of the toughest duty cycles that you could have for zero emission technologies. And so if they figure if you can make it work in the kind of terminals and operations and so forth that we have, that it actually serves as a great, you know, way to demonstrate that it can be done anywhere. So just those technologies, battery electric, hydrogen fuel cell, and then something else, you know, other technologies that may not even have been created yet. And so these are all things that we have to do. Ships are a tough one. How do you move toward reducing your carbon footprint on ships? You know, that's a hard one. And, you know, I don't know if you're going to have a zero emission ship anytime soon, but ultimately we really have to reduce our combustion based technologies there as well. So I'll stop there, but a lot of stuff. So I agree pretty much with everything with Matt said.
Well, on that topic of ZE demonstration, what have you learned so far, and what are the remaining challenges? What's worked well? What needs to get better for some of this zero emission equipment? I know the ports are both running a variety of demonstrations currently and have wrapped some up recently.
Me first? Am I going?
Sure,
or
Chris.
Matt?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Sorry, you were on a roll. Sorry, Chris. Yeah, please.
That it takes time. These things don't go as fast as you think they can. They will, but I think right now it's that battery technology is still not far enough along to really support the kinds of long range duty cycles that are needed in especially in trucking, but even in some of the cargo handling technology duty cycles, and certainly in things like shipping. You know, that's one of the reasons you don't have you know, a lot of battery technology in you know, the ocean going vehicles. Is just there's just no way that the batteries can handle that kind of, you know, two weeks travel across the ocean. So that's it. I think it's just that it's taking time. Battery technology is still slow to evolve. The costs are high right now, we're doing, you can buy a battery electric truck for $350,000 maybe. Probably got a range of about 150 miles. They tell us that they'll be able to have a range of about 250 miles in another year or two, but that still is a pretty low range. We are testing right now a hydrogen fuel cell truck. The prototypes are $1 million each. And while we understand you can buy them now and from other vendors for $500,000 or $600,000, we're talking about a lot of expense here. So this area's got to grow. It's got to evolve, and we're completely committed to doing it. Zero emission is our goal. But really, it's taken a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money.
Matt, what are you seeing on the Long Beach side? What are you all learning from your demonstration?
To me, the biggest thing that we've learned is we have a lot to learn. I think we knew that going into it, and I think that it's made itself very clear. I think that we've got a dedicated team of port staff, terminal operators, vendors that are approaching all of these demonstrations from the perspective of we need to learn from all of these challenges when a roadblock is met, so that we can come up with a solution and incorporate that into the next version. And I think that we've been very good at that. But I think that, to Chris's point, they take time because we're constantly having to identify a challenge, come up with a solution, and then move on from there. And so I think that the biggest lesson, again, is just how much we still have to learn, how much we still have to overcome in terms of technology and infrastructure in order to keep moving forward.
Matt, staying with you with these demonstrations, and I think a lot of the talk we've heard quite a bit about battery electric and some of the advantages, some of the challenges
around their box.
If your name is Andrew Listener, please hit mute. Thank you. But I want to talk a little bit about hydrogen. We hear a lot about battery electric for a lot of good reasons. Do you see hydrogen as playing a significant role in the ports, of the future, or is it going to be, niche operations? What's your crystal ball say there?
I do see hydrogen as playing a role at the ports in the future. I think, both ports, we are fuel and technology neutral. We want as many tools in the toolbox as we can have in order to meet our goals. And so from that perspective, I think that I look at hydrogen as an absolutely critical piece to that. I think that, there are advantages to hydrogen. There are advantages to battery electric, and it depends a lot on the duty cycle. It depends a lot on the infrastructure and the operational needs of the either truck driver or the terminal, right? And so I do see it increasing. I think that, we are in a place where because the hydrogen technology is so extremely expensive, that it may have gotten a slower start in this space. But hydrogen fuel cells, as in the transportation sector, have been around for a long time. I think that just since 2017 to now, battery electric was at the time a little bit more affordable. In 2017 when we started our demonstrations, I think that there were more vendors ready to come up and start demonstration projects, and I think there was more public funding focused on battery electric. But I think that that's starting to shift a little bit. I think that you are seeing much more interest in the hydrogen sector. And I think that there's a recognition that those prices need to come down for both the equipment itself and the fuel. But DOE recently announced their Operation Moonshot, which the first element of it is focusing on bringing down the cost of green hydrogen produced from renewable power. And if they can do that, and if the technology can advance and come down in cost as well, I think it can play a very key role in solutions for both cargo handling equipment and drayage trucks.
Chris, can I get your thoughts on hydrogen? I mean, can this help
Sure.
address?
I think I like what Matt said in that there is really, I think we're going to end up with a mix of technologies. I don't think there's a single answer. I think there's a role for battery electric vehicles, and then there's a role for hydrogen. I think it just depends upon the duty cycle. The advantages of hydrogen is extremely promising technology. And the reason is because it gives you range. The very thing that I said earlier with the limited range that you see with batteries, you get range with hydrogen. You can go right now, they can go up to 400 miles, which is a big difference compared to the battery electric vehicles. They also, you get a better driver experience. I mean, it takes the same amount of time to fuel a hydrogen truck as it does to fuel a diesel truck. It's about 20 minutes. And whereas with a battery, you've got to, charge it for, at least a couple of hours, and in some cases, longer, in many cases longer than that. You also don't have the infrastructure issues, with batteries, you've got to run power cables in and charging infrastructure. Whereas with hydrogen, it's really very similar to natural gas and some of the other technologies that exist, and it can be added to fueling stations that exist in the area already. And so these are all great advantages, but as Matt said, and he's absolutely right, there's a cost issue here. They tend to be expensive. On average, hydrogen fuel cell equipment is about 25% higher in cost than their battery electric counterparts. The fuel itself is 4 or 5 times more expensive than natural gas or diesel fuel, and also more expensive than electricity. So these are problems, and then they have to, continue to look for ways to make sure, and this is true with electric power as well, but to make sure that it's green hydrogen. That is to say that it's generated in a way that is not just, making even worse carbon footprint. So I think it's great. I mentioned ships. There's even locomotives. I mean, those are all areas where I think hydrogen shows promise and potential for development. But we'll see. It's going to be take some time, and the next 10 years I think is really where you're going to see all of these technologies emerge. And as Matt said, we're technology neutral. We're not trying to pick winners, but will be very interesting to see how these technologies evolve.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, I agree. I think the potential for extended range and some of the infrastructure could be really valuable for hydrogen, but it's hard to get past that capital expense. Well, since you mentioned OGVs a little bit, Chris, I'd like to stay on that for a second. CARB, as you know, expanded their at-birth rule, last fall, and those expanded requirements are coming up, about 18 months from now for container ships that are now facing, an expanded fleet requirement. What's the port's role going to be, and how do you see that playing out in San Pedro Bay to help terminals and vessel operators comply with this new rule?
Well, there are terminal plans that are required, and also the ports have to have plans. And we're actually working now with the terminals. Long Beach is doing the same thing to help them, assist them develop their terminal plans, which are the plans for how they're going to install appropriate infrastructure and manage the process of complying with the at-berth rule. So we're working closely with our terminals, both ports are, as well as the ports, as we have to have a plan too. So the terminals have a plan, and then ours has to sort of fit with the terminal plans as well. So that's the near-term thing that we're doing, is just working with them to develop, to assure that the appropriate infrastructure is in place, that our leasing contracts and so forth do not stand in the way of developing and installing this equipment, and then just making sure to find grants and anything else we can to help them defray costs. So, I mean, those are the short-term things. The idea of reducing emissions at berth, it's something that we put in our Cleaner Action Plan update in 2017, and we said that we wanted by 2030 to get to up to 100% control of emissions of container emissions and also others. It's harder to do in the other source categories. It's going to be toughest to do in tankers break bulk and ro-ros and things like that, that's harder. But we want to reach zero emissions, or at least complete control of emissions at birth in those areas as well. So we support the idea. We want to make sure that the technology and the infrastructure is there to do it, but we support what CARB is trying to do, and we just want to work closely with them as best we can to help them implement it in a way that makes sense.
Thanks. Matt, what are your thoughts on at birth?
Yeah, I think that, Chris nailed it. I think that, both ports, we're going through and working with our terminals as Chris described. I would say that the only other piece I would add on to it is both ports, we are also working with other California ports, just to make sure that everything is lined up, that we have good communication, good sharing of information and ideas in order to make sure that we're all successful in meeting this CARB regulation.
I think that's an important point. You have vessels that are, maybe their first call is San Pedro Bay and they're continuing up the state to the Bay Area or something.
That's right.
Important that they're able to comply at all their stops. Well, talking about OGVs, obviously the last, pandemic period, we've seen this onslaught of cargo, and with that, more vessels at anchorage than we've seen in a very long time. On an emissions inventory perspective, Matt, what do you expect to see when these, the 2020 EI gets released, or even the 2021, once you crunch those numbers? What's the impact going to be of these vessels having to wait off the at anchorage for days and days?
I think it's clear there will be an impact. We are going to see, I don't want to quantify what the emissions increases, but there will be an emissions increase. And I think that, both ports as well as the state and our EIs, as you mentioned, are going to address it. We're going to need to look at that and devote, some thought and analysis to what those emissions look like in our emissions inventory. So that emissions inventory is being, the numbers are being crunched as we speak, and will be out later this year.
Yeah. Chris, anything more you could add?
I was making notes there. I was just, that's it. Unfortunately, we're gonna see an increase in emissions. There's no question about it. We don't know how much yet. They're actually working this week and next week. They're actually doing the work, the initial kind of modeling, and because they've gathered the data now, and so they'll have answers probably by the end of the month. We'll have an idea of what it's going to look like, but I'm sure that we'll have an increase in emissions. I'm curious as to how much, and to dig into the weeds and see which pollutants and where and why, and if we can understand it. But I don't think there's any doubt that there'll be an increase. A couple of interesting twists that we had a lot of, and this is a little bit into the weeds, but Matt knows this as well. When a ship sits at anchorage but doesn't go into the ports, if it just sits there, it's not in our emissions inventory. It's in the state's emissions inventory. If it sits at anchorage and then it goes to one or both of the ports, then that's when we count it into our emissions inventory. So the reason I bring that up is there were a lot of tankers that were just sitting there, and Long Beach has actually a little more of that than we do, but they didn't come into the ports. So they actually don't go into our emissions inventory, but they're there, and certainly there were emissions associated with them, and the state's going to pick that up in its state emissions inventory. But our actual emissions for tankers, the ones that we calculate, that is to say the ones that actually come into the port, will go down. And I think that's true with Long Beach as well, just because there wasn't as much activity with everybody staying at home. There wasn't as much use of fuel, oil, and gasoline and everything else. So that number is going to go down. Cruise activity, even though the cruise industry died, there were a lot of cruise ships that were sitting at anchorage, and they were going back and forth into the ports to get stores. And so they are part of our emissions inventory. So those numbers actually went up, but the tankers went down, but we think those two offset each other. But the containers went up, and it just is what it is. As far as the future, we're talking with people about plans for what do you do? And I mean, these are very unusual events. We haven't had this kind of anchorages issues for many years. But what are the ways to address them? We're actually starting to have some conversations with the agencies and some of the other stakeholders to see if there's something we can do if we anticipate this kind of a situation again. And I don't want to say too much yet about what the plans are, because they're just ideas that are being thrown out. But we're actually trying to think of how we can get at this for the future and try to reduce the effects of these kinds of anchorages if we can.
It's a tricky challenge. I mean, you've got a lot of strategies to deal with emissions at berth, but a vessel that's not quite at berth is a different animal, but still kind of in the airshed.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, can we shift back to a topic which I know is close to your heart, clean trucks? What is the status of the updated clean truck program, and have the recent sort of state commitments changed at all the forecast you see at the ports here?
Well, the state regulatory landscape is evolving. It has evolved even since the 2017 CAP update, and so we continue to react to that and work with the regulators, both the State Air Resources Board and the Air Quality Management District on implementing the Clean Truck Program. And both of those agencies are very keen and involved in those issues, both on the zero emission side as well as on the near zero and natural gas and other areas. Where we stand is this: both ports in May, I believe, approved a contract to have a third-party vendor set up the collection system, the IT associated with the collection of the fee, system for the fee. That third-party vendor contract has to be approved by the Federal Maritime Commission. And then once that's been approved, which we hope will be sometime in the near future, then it takes about 6 months to set the system up. And then once it's set up, we can begin collecting the fee. So we're looking at first quarter of 2021 or 22, excuse me, and for the fee to be collected. But we're in the meantime doing some planning. Our last board meeting, our Board of Harbor Commissioners directed us to work closely with Long Beach, and we've already been talking to Matt and to his colleagues about this, to do a lot of stakeholder outreach, a lot of stakeholder engagement, and bring a tariff back to our two boards by the end of this year. And its purpose would be to formalize the rate itself. We had a resolution last year for $10 a TU that would formalize that, and also have a lot of other things like a description of what the exemptions are going to be for various types of equipment, for the low NOx and so forth. And then our plans for what our programs are going to be, as far as how we're going to spend the money, because we have to, if we're going to collect money, we really are obligated to, before we start collecting money, make it very clear as to what we're going to do with it. So all of that is part of it. So we plan to have probably more than one. We haven't got the final plans yet, but I hope that we can have more than one big public stakeholder meeting, and a series of targeted meetings with various stakeholder organizations and groups. And this is all going to be, frankly, over the next 6 weeks. And the goal is to get as much feedback as we can on some of these key issues. One of the big issues that, and I'll stop talking after this, Matt, sorry, our commission, and I know that Long Beach has been aware of these issues as well, is really concerned that, before we start collecting a fee, let's make sure that it doesn't get it doesn't hit the drivers too hard. A lot of last time when the clean truck fee was imposed back in the old clean truck program, a lot of times the drivers ended up paying that fee out of their pocket. And we want to find, and they're not making the kind of money compared to the other stakeholders in the goods movement chain to afford that kind of a fee. So one of the big questions that's been put to us is figure out how to avoid having the drivers pay that fee. And because our board will be reluctant to approve and implement a fee if they think that it's just going to be something that the drivers are going to pay. And so, and I know Long Beach has said the same thing. They're concerned about these issues as well. So I'll stop there, but there are a number of really important issues that have to be discussed as part of the stakeholder engagement process that we're going to undertake in the next few weeks and months. And so, you know, that's going to be important.
Thanks, Chris. I know HIC and the membership are definitely be excited to see how this comes out and ready to be a sounding board when the ports want to have those conversations. But Matt, can I get your thoughts? Clean truck program, big high profile program for the ports.
What's that? Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, can I get your thoughts on CTP? Yeah. It's a high profile program, no matter how you slice it.
Yeah, it is. And I think that, you know, Chris gave the summary of where we're at. I think that, you know, it is where we're at, and he outlined some of the pieces that we need to put in place. I guess the only thing that I would add, at least from the Port of Long Beach's perspective, is there is a desire to move forward with the rate soon. And I think that, you know, Chris laid out what we have to do to get there. Specifically, the rate collection mechanism needs to be in place, and that's going to take a little bit of time, and we need to do the implementation tariff. And so if you put that together along with the other items that Chris was talking about, including stakeholder engagement, working out the details of the incentive program and all of that, it's looking like probably a start time of the first quarter of next year.
Great, thanks. Matt, can I stay with you and switch topics? Water Resources Action Plan, the RAP. What's the status of that? How's it going?
So it's going good in terms of just general water quality and wildlife. So the Water Resources Action Plan, for some of you that may not be as familiar with it, it's a little bit different. When we developed it, and when did we approve it? 2009, like, takes me back. It's a little bit different than the Clean Air Action Plan. It was really focused on helping develop an implementation plan for the total maximum daily load that was being developed at the time for San Pedro Bay. And the approach it took was to identify the programs and projects from a water quality and wildlife perspective that the ports either had in place or programs that needed to be put in place in order to reach our overall wildlife and water quality goals. And so it was established. For the most part, both ports, I think, had very robust and good programs that continue today, whether it's our stormwater programs, our beneficial reuse of sediment, all of these types of things are going strong. We don't hear about them maybe in the news quite so much, but they're still going strong. You know, something that did hit the news recently was both ports. We just concluded our most recent biological survey, which, you know, once again documented great improvement in the health of the harbor from both a habitat and a marine life perspective. And I think that that's the best report card that we can get on, you know, the success of the RAP over time. In addition to that, some of the things that the Port of Long Beach has been doing over the last couple of years, we've always had, before we had our clean air programs at the Port of Long Beach, you know, our first initial big environmental program was our stormwater program that was started in like 1992. And so over the last few years, we've had some major revamping of that program and kind of changed how it was structured. But some really interesting things have come out of that over the last few years. For example, we've partnered with the Long Beach Water Department to do several studies on recycled water and advanced treated water, and how it can be brought and used in the port to reduce the potable water use, especially for a couple of the heavy industrial users in the port. We've started to look into how we are going to tackle stormwater and the treatment of stormwater in the terminals, and trying to look at innovative ways that are more cost effective, efficient, and provide better benefits for the environment. So we've done a lot of studies and research in that area, and look forward to implementing some of those new programs in the future. But again, I guess that's kind of a long-winded to say everything we're doing on the water side is still going. It's going strong. It's a big piece of what we do in the environmental planning division, and we continue to be innovative, have challenges, overcome them, and look forward to continued progress.
Yeah, it's remarkable to look at the water quality for what it was, a few decades back to the amount of wildlife that you see now in the harbor. It's the sort of thing I'd say that doesn't happen by accident, right? It's that steady implementation of programs over time. Yeah. But Chris, can I get your thoughts? Water quality LA is also looking strong compared to years past. But how's the wrap on your side?
Yeah, it's very similar programs. We work closely with Long Beach on those, and so that Matt's description was a very good one. I'm always amazed by how clean the water is. We rarely, if ever, exceed water quality standards. We do have some TMDL issues that we have to continue to work on with sediments. But the water quality itself is extraordinarily good. We have regular monitoring events that we do to check on the quality and the nature of water in the harbor. As Matt described, we just finished a biological survey that shows an even more rich and robust biological habitat in the port than ever. And so it continues to be extraordinarily clean and a source of growth. I always laugh about the stories some of the old timers always tell when, I always get a kick out of listening to them talk about, what was going on in the ports, and how when years ago, when they wanted to clean the barnacles and the algae and the growth off the bottom of their boats, they would just bring their boat in and park it into the inner harbor of the port and just leave it there for a day or two. And the water quality was so toxic and so bad that everything that was on the bottom of the boat just dropped off. And so that's how they cleaned their boats. Now it's the opposite. It's one of the best places to have growth, and we see dolphins and other animals going down the main channel, and it's very, very exciting. So
I agree. It is exciting. Of course, on the flip side, the ports will always be sort of that last stop of the watershed, right? I mean, everything from the LA basin is going to be flowing down this way, and that will present ongoing challenges that are to a certain extent out of the port's control. But yeah, the progress has been really impressive. Can I shift to another topic that gets a lot of discussion, not obvious, that has some great solutions, but CEQA reform? Chris, it's a recurring topic, in around the ports. It's a recurring topic in Sacramento. Are there opportunities to improve the CEQA process at the ports? Timeline, cost, outcomes. What are your thoughts?
There's always opportunities to do better. CEQA is an important law. Its purpose was to really bring together permitting process. Years ago, each individual agencies would permit, and they would focus in their permitting process on what happened in their area and not in another area. And so what CEQA did and does is makes before you can issue a permit, you have to have a holistic look at what the overall impact would be on the environment from a particular proposed project. And then all the permitting agencies have to come together and be a part of that holistic look. And so you try to make sure that you aren't going to have an adverse impact overall on a project. That's good. That has to continue. What happens is that sometimes the CEQA process gets long. and drawn out. And I think that, if we can find ways to make sure that the process can, move along expeditiously, I think that is always good. And we always are looking for ways to find ways to expedite the process. But overall, CEQA is important. Its central purpose of making sure that overall a bigger picture look at the potential impacts of a project is taken, I think must continue. And so figuring out how to expedite and be more efficient is good.
Thanks, Chris. Matt, what are your thoughts?
I would agree with Chris. I think that, internally we can always, and we do always, look at ways to be more efficient in both time and money. And we continue to improve our processes, establish our protocols, learn from our friends across the Bay as they do from us, so that we can, be as efficient as we can in producing the documents. But, and in addition, and I agree with what Chris said about the purpose, but one of the other main purposes of CEQA is for public disclosure. It's intentionally a public process to engage the public in that review. And when you have a development project at the port, the public is very interested. And so per CEQA as the purpose, that necessitates sometimes for a complex port project that it is a little lengthier than some might like. We do have to do a lot of analysis to, go to Chris's point, get out what the overall big picture is. What's this project really doing? And we have to let the public participate in that process. Not let the public, but the public has a role in that process, right? And so that's the whole purpose of CEQA. So by nature, the projects in the ports will be complex. They will have a lot of public attention, and therefore, the environmental documents have to match that. And so it does make for a bigger document than you might get in another jurisdiction, but it's part of the process. I would say, though, on the NEPA side, for the National Environmental Policy Act, we have advocated for and had some success in streamlining NEPA, specifically as it relates to projects where the only federal action is funding. This is coming up more and more, especially with our rail programs. A typical marine project, it engages Army Corps from the beginning because we're doing water work, and that's our federal partner, and it's a big EIR, EIS. But what we're running into more and more is projects where the only federal interest, like Pier B, is that they could be a potential funding source. And so I think that there is some work that could be done in those cases to streamline the NEPA process, so that there's, like with CEQA, one agency, one decision in some way. So you don't have to go to every agency that might be a funding source and get their independent and varying NEPA buy-off. And relying on the robust nature of CEQA. CEQA is in California super robust, as we just said. So when we do an environmental document, say for a Pier B, that should be pretty good and go a long way to satisfying the NEPA concerns. And so I think that is one area where we have had some success, and we will continue to push to make that approval process and that environmental clearance for funding more streamlined.
I think that's great, and it does speak to sort of the intent of these rules. If the intent of having to go through NEPA is just to sort of be able to fund the project at a federal level, is that the best use of our sort of port and federal resources? Right. Well, let me step back a little moment here, Matt. What is the next big thing on the horizon for your group? What are you wrestling with?
Well, hopefully there's not a new big thing that comes, because I think we have a couple of big things that we're currently working on, including I think that continuing to push towards achieving our zero emission goals, right? And everything that entails. I think that's going to continue to dominate a lot of what we are doing at the port on the environmental front. As a piece of that too, and the whole reason why we're doing it, is really getting at, the climate issues. But specifically, I think that the new piece that we're now starting to immerse ourselves in more and more is the fueling of that zero emission equipment, whether it's grid power, electricity, on-site renewable generation. What does that look like? And I think that at least at the Port of Long Beach, we're going to be taking a bigger role in planning for how we get our energy in the port and how we make that resilient, and how what that looks like, working with our partners at the utility and our terminal partners and all of that. So I see that as a big developing area. But then, just continuing, like we were saying before, the stormwater programs, the water quality programs, they have all been going all these years. They will continue to be. We have lots of work to do, and a lot of good outcomes to highlight, but more that we want to do in all the other resource areas as well.
Thanks. Chris, what's your crystal ball say? What's on the horizon for you and your group?
Zero emissions. I mean, that's the big goal that we have. I mean, climate change is in my opinion, after COVID, the biggest crisis facing the world today, right now. And we have to reduce our carbon footprint. We have to find a way to have either zero emissions or technologies that operate with a lower carbon intensity. And that's it. We've got to look at every resource category. It's not just trucks and cargo handling equipment, but we've got to look at the harbor craft. We've got to look at the locomotives. We've got to look at the ships. And we just have to go through each of those categories and find ways to reduce our emissions, our carbon CO2 emissions in those categories. That's our big crisis. The mayor of Los Angeles has said that he believes the climate, the decade of the 2020s is going to have to be the decade of action when it comes to climate change. Either you did something and you look back and you say, okay, we made a process, or you wasted your time and you look back and you realize that, now we've crossed the point of no return as far as adverse effects to our long-term health here in terms of climate change. And I think he's right.
Thanks. Yeah, I remember, some decades ago now in high school, we were talking about climate change, as, hey, here are the actions that need to happen. And that was many, many decades ago. And it seems like we're still, to an extent, talking about it. So I agree. It's time for some action. Broadly, though, the ports have a lot of initiatives. The HAIC is, as an organization, committed to sort of furthering the strength of the ports here in San Pedro Bay. And so my question to you all is sort of long-term participants and observers. What can the HAIC do, and our membership as as an industry do to work with you? Chris, I'll start with you and kick it over to you, Matt.
What you have done, which is partner with us to develop ways to reduce emissions and reduce our impact on the environment overall, while still making sure that the ports are healthy and competitive and productive. We have to strike that balance. I mean, that's the whole sustainability thing, is the community, is the environment, and the economic piece. Those are the three pieces. And frankly, that's the best thing that could happen. We've had a lot of success. I'm not going to give you the stump speech on how many emissions reductions we've had since the 2006 introduction of the Clean Air Action Plan, but the numbers are big. The reason it's happened is because we had a really good collaboration with folks like the members of your organization, and that's why it's worked. Everybody sat down, rolled up their sleeves, and figured out what they could do. We all agreed that reducing emissions and growing is green is something we have to do in order to sustain ourselves. So working with the agencies, working with the AQMD, working with the ARB, working with the community organizations, the neighborhood councils, and various other environmental groups, as well as industry and all of our industry partners. That's the best thing you can do is continue to do what you've done, which is partner with us and help us, put our heads together and solve problems. It's been a great success thus far, and we want to thank all of you for that, and please continue to help us.
Thanks, Chris. And Matt?
I couldn't have said it better. I think Chris nailed it. That's what it is. When I look here at the attendee list, I know a lot of the names because you guys are very great at advocating, partnering, and sharing the story of the ports, right? And so I think that's important at all levels, whether it's, making your thoughts heard with agencies during rulemaking, or, with the port staff or commissioners. It all helps, and being partners in telling the port story and the trials and tribulations with our initiatives as we move forward, I think is the role that you do play, and we need you to continue playing.
Thank you. And I think as we go forward, you'll find that the HIC and the members are here. Like, as I mentioned, we're big fans of the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach, and we want you to be extremely successful. That was the end of the questions that I had. We've had some audience questions come in, and we've got a few minutes here to address some of those. So Chris and Matt, let me pull up a couple of those and see where this goes. We've got a question here about CARB's proposed plan to allow only drayage trucks that are zero emission vehicles to be sold by 2023 in the state. Any thoughts on that? Does that complicate what the port's trying to do on clean trucks? Does that help? What are your thoughts there?
It helps, but it makes us have to kind of rethink some of the things we identified in the original 2017 CAP update. The timing of some of the things that we're going to do may change a little bit because of that. But anytime the Air Resources Board can propose requirements, that helps us because it makes it a statewide requirement. First of all, it also allows us to. It gives us a little. It's a lot easier for us to work on and develop zero emission programs for trucks when we've got a regulatory backing. We're not regulators. And so, as I said earlier, we do things that are voluntary, that are, based on incentives and various other things. And so to the extent that we get the Air Resources Board to help us by backing up what we're doing with rulemaking and regulations, we're happy. That being said, that requirement in 2023 is quick. And so we would want to work closely with them. When I say quick, meaning just, we want to make sure that there are enough trucks out there so that when people start buying trucks to bring them into drayage, that they're A, available, and B, at a price that, truckers can afford. So there's that concern, but we'll work with the Air Resources Board and talk to them about, what they're thinking and try to find ways to support what they're doing and have it be a part of what we're doing.
Thanks. Matt?
No, I agree with that. And I think that we need to continue, as Chris said, to work with our resources board to make sure that unintended consequences like lack of incentive funding, if it's a regulatory requirement, are addressed. There's some issues that we need to look forward or make sure that we are clear on what the path forward is. And I think to Chris's point, we also need to continue to be engaged to make sure what is ultimately, passed is actually achievable. And so I think that we'll continue to be engaged on that.
Yeah. A couple other questions came in regarding South Coast rules or plans. One, okay, so after years of talking about it, we have an ISR rule. It's on the books now to be implemented in the coming years. How do you see that impacting the port's clean truck plans, or will it at all?
Well, I think that at least from the Port of Long Beach, we still believe that the MOU is the preferred approach. I think, having the collaborative approach makes most sense. In terms of what they may or may not be considering in terms of the ISR, we'll just have to continue to monitor and engage and see what happens. I don't think at this stage, maybe Chris does, but at this stage, I don't know what impact that would have on the CTP. But we'll have to, like I said, continue to monitor it and stay engaged.
Yeah, I agree. Our view, both ports really have worked closely on these issues. Indirect source rule, in our opinion, is not the right thing to do for the ports. We believe that the first problem is we don't really have control of the sources, and so it's hard to be accountable for sources that you don't control. We can do incentive programs, we can do other programs and so forth, but to be accountable from a regulatory perspective is hard when you don't control the sources. The other thing is that, when you start trying to regulate what we've done over the last, 15 years, you end up, people, if they're going to be regulated, they're not nearly as creative and aggressive in trying to find ways to reduce emissions and set targets for themselves, because they're worried that if they become regulated for those targets they may set, that it has a chilling effect on their ability to really go out there, because they may have to get penalized for not meeting something. So we think that is the wrong signal to send. We instead prefer to work with the agencies. We know that they have deadlines to meet under the Clean Air Act. We want to work with them. Our Clean Air Action Plan actually was designed, the goals we set were designed to help or do our fair share toward contributing toward Clean Air Act goals. And we want to do that. So we want to work closely with the AQMD to address their NOx concerns and NOx deadlines, as well as with the Air Resources Board on all their programs that they have. And so we think it's better to work together, collaborate, do an MOU, and develop programs together than to do regulation. But we'll wait, we'll monitor it, we'll see what happens. We understand that those discussions are ongoing now, and we'll see what happens and react accordingly.
As an HIC, we're added our voice to the crowd of folks who were pushing to go a different direction from this ISR. Experience tells us that the more complex a program or the more complex a rule gets, the lower its chances of being a really endeavor, and that is such a convoluted piece of regulation there. It's going to be awkward to see it implemented, but we'll like I say, I know conversations are continuing to go forward. Henry, I want to give you a moment to close it out here, but before that, Chris, Matt, thank you very much for your time. You guys have been out front and in the trenches doing this, and I really appreciate you sharing your perspective with the HIC today. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And Henry, kick it back to you.
Yeah, well, Greg and Matt and Chris, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. This was a kind of a new discussion that we tried this year, and very pleased at the questions that we received in the chat, and also the great feedback that we're probably going to get. Mind you, we're going to also have this available online in about a week and a half once we edit it out and add some great subtitles to it. But before letting everyone go, I definitely want to thank both, again, the Ports of LA and Long Beach, our sponsors, BYD, SoCalGas, and Mitsubishi Cement. And then finally, Greg, for kind of leading the charge on this. So thanks a lot. All right, have a good one, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.